And it's super great to see that people are joining in. As mentioned before we went live, Phil, we will be having a 30-minute masterclass of how to start working data-driven with your recruitment. And we're so happy seeing everyone joining us. And if you are just as excited as we are, please let us know in the comments, because this is an activity for all of us. So please show our engagement in the comments. And we will get down to business in just a minute. And if you have questions for us, please also leave it in the comment section, and we'll wrap it up like 10 minutes before we end this live stream. We'll take all of your questions. And of course, if you would like all the key takeaways from this live stream, don't forget to comment summary in the comment section as well, because we'll be giving out the great summary afterwards. So that's super, super important. And hello, Phil. Hello, Maciej. Hello, everyone. It's super fun having you with us. And Phil, for those of our viewers who doesn't know your background, your story, your passion, who you are, could you please explain and give us a proper introduction?
Sure. I'll try to keep it short. I guess, you know, I'm sort of like a business nerd who fell into the HR tech space sort of accidentally. My career started off, I started investing in the stock market when I was like 12 years old. I've just always been sort of interested in like numbers and stuff like that. Studied finance, worked in venture capital, doing early stage software investing. And then I went to Harvard to get my MBA and really wanted to start a business, taught myself how to program, and started an HR tech company called NextWave, which I ran for 5 or 6 years. And then about 2 years ago, I hired somebody to sort of replace me at the business as sort of a general manager, and had extra time on my hands. And I'm somebody who just sort of has that startup itch. It's very irrational, but the people out there who have started businesses before kind of know what I'm talking about. You just, you know, you have ideas and you want to see those ideas come to life, and you just start working on them, and kind of time flies. And so I love to learn. I love to teach, which is why, you know, I'm excited about doing stuff like this. And a gap in the market that I saw is that there's all these HR tools out there for so many different use cases. It's really complicated. Every single day it's getting more complicated. And there aren't a lot of really terrific resources out there for people to understand what are the tools I should be looking at. You know, how should I think about pricing, internal stakeholder management, all this stuff you need to be successful. So 2 years ago, I started this website called Select Software Reviews, and all we do is try to stay on top of the latest in HR tech. And that's everything from, you know, programmatic advertising to AI to D&I to, you know, remote work, all this stuff. And we just write it up into free online guides on our website for anybody to use, to find and buy the right software. So that's sort of a little bit about me.
Yeah, short and consistent. Great.
Nice.
Really sum it up. And I guess that leads us quite into what we're going to get down to today. We're going to get quite educational, as mentioned, about how to become and how to start working data-driven. Because I guess out there are a lot of softwares, there are a lot of processes and like history of how to do this. And there could be like a fear for some of us start working data-driven. And I guess I'm super passionate about just helping people start and getting it going with the right stages. So, and I mean, for instance, when we're talking about digital transformation, people often use like sweeping words and terms, making it sound more like complicated than it needs to be. Do you think we have like, how can we simplify this process? How can we empower organizations to trust and use data as an access? What's your like insight of this?
Yeah, and I know how overwhelming this stuff can be. This is sort of like a random story, but my first job out of college for a year, I was basically working like 100-hour weeks at this really, really demanding job. And I didn't keep on top of anything that was happening in the world. And this is when Twitter came out and Facebook started getting like more popular, and LinkedIn. And I kind of like, after a year, it's almost like I was living in a cave for a year, and I came out and it was like, what is Twitter? You know, it's like this weird thing. It's like 140 characters. Why is it 140 characters? Like, it was extremely overwhelming. And I kind of thought for like a minute, I was like, I'm never going to catch up.
No.
But if you just break it down into really, really small pieces, I think that you can chip away at understanding the new technology, digital transformation, how to become more data driven. And so that's sort of like a little personal story, but I think from the perspective of, if you're on this live chat today and you're like, I want to get started with this stuff, but it feels overwhelming, that's totally normal. Everybody feels that way. And my advice is to start to make progress a little bit at a time, and start with really understanding your current hiring process, from the first touch a candidate goes through all the way really through becoming an employee. And that's an amazing place to start to just lay the foundation for then understanding how different tools and how different metrics can play a role in impacting how that funnel can change and how that process can change. And, a lot of people kind of understand at a high level or intuitively what their hiring process probably looks like. But if you really map it out, like I'm literally talking about like taking a piece of paper, or maybe it's a couple of pieces of paper because it's a long process, and be like, okay, there's like 6 different ways people find out about us. It's referrals, it's job postings, it's LinkedIn emails, it's whatever. And all of those kind of funnel into an application. And from an application, they get screened by a human being, or maybe you have a chatbot in there. And from there, you get a phone screen. And from there, you get it, like actually map that out for the roles that you're focused on. And that's sort of just like a really useful exercise to get started.
Yeah, I totally agree. And just to like start from the beginning, don't make it too complicated when you go for it. Just as mentioned, map out the stages and just start like measuring, getting to know your different stages. Super helpful. So for like getting into your background with Select Software and what you guys actually do and how you came across Adway, would you like to like explain your foundings? You were doing like I guess you did programmatic job ads, advertising, or like foundings in regards to what would be like softwares to check out. And I guess Adway was one of them.
Yeah, so we have all these landscapes on our website for people who are looking for a new ATS, or they're trying to use AI, or whatever the case may be. And so programmatic is one that we have on the site, and it's actually one of the ones that I enjoyed the most to put together because it is so data heavy, and I'm just like a complete numbers nerd. Like I love thinking about like all the different ways that numbers can have an impact on your business. And I guess that's the definition of a nerd. So anyways, we did a ton of research, and we came across Adway, thankfully, in our process of sort of scouring the world for the best programmatic solutions. And I was just super impressed. I mean, by, the way that you guys are opening up new channels to recruiters, as well as sort of increasing like the yield from people that go to your career site, that check out your employer brand. Because as we know, around like 95% of people that interact with your employer brand, they never become part of your hiring funnel because maybe they're a passive candidate, they don't have a resume, maybe they get distracted and they never come back. Like there's all these different sort of low-hanging fruits that as a recruiting team you can optimize. And that's a big part of where data comes into this, right? Because if you've, again, mapped out your hiring process and you say, wow, there's a ton of people who come to our career website because we asked the marketing team to give us the Google Analytics data, and only 3% of those people apply for a job. That's like a really amazing insight that can have drastic implications for how your talent acquisition teams functions. And if you look at that and you're like, okay, the reasons for this might be, it's really hard to apply for jobs, or maybe the people who are coming to our company are not ready to apply for a job. They don't have a resume. We need to give them a way to apply that doesn't require a resume. Or maybe a lot of the traffic's on mobile and we're not mobile optimized, or we know people get distracted on mobile. We need to run a retargeting campaign, like whatever the case may be, like sort of having that foundation and then putting the numbers on that foundation and seeing some patterns and seeing where things are breaking down can really help you to focus in. Sorry, I'm just like going back to sort of the topic of the day, even though you asked me a different question, but I think it's like so impactful, and I want people to take away useful information from this, to really understand those numbers and where are the bottlenecks and where are things breaking down, and just focus on one thing per quarter or even per year after you kind of lay out those numbers.
Yeah, and I mean, I feel you. This is a passion of mine as well. And I mean, speaking of the bottlenecks and the different stages, could you like be a bit more specific? I mean, let's dig into it and start talking about how do you start measuring and knowing your different stages? What is the foundings? What needs to be done to start working with data?
Yeah, so unfortunately, we sort of live in this world where more likely than not, the data that you need is in different systems. You probably have data that is in your job boards like LinkedIn or Indeed. You might have data in your ATS. You might have data in Google Analytics. So you might have data in your candidate assessment tool, your performance management tool. Like all of these things, unfortunately, like don't really talk to each other. And you can have a system like Adway that can kind of tie a lot of this stuff together for you and give you some pretty interesting analytics. You can also hire a consultant who can kind of stitch things together. If you're a big enough company, you might have a data team. You can use something like Tableau to build your own dashboard, but it's really hard. And so what I would recommend is, after you've sort of mapped out those different stages, create a spreadsheet that you dedicate to an hour a month to updating, and go into LinkedIn and say, okay, how many people did we email? How many people responded to us? Go into Glassdoor. How many people viewed our profile? How many people applied? Go into Google Analytics or Slack, the person who has access to that data, and say, how many people went to our career site? Go in the ATS. How many people applied? How many people got phone screens, et cetera? And just sort of like map that out. And then you're going to start to see patterns where the frustrations that you deal with on a day-to-day basis are now going to have numbers wrapped around them, and those numbers give you power. So for example, maybe you see that, like, wow, our problem is not that we don't get enough applications. Our problem is we get too many applications. And our recruiting team, all we do is complain about how we have to like wade through all these resumes all day long. And you know what? The numbers actually play that out. Like, we have a ton of applications. And so maybe that's the biggest problem. We need to invest in some sort of automated assessment tool or process. And maybe that's video interviews. Maybe if you're a technical recruiter, it's a tech assessment platform. Maybe it is some sort of chatbot that's asking knockout questions around visa eligibility, hours, stuff like that. Like you might have just found a really interesting problem to solve. And when you solve that problem, you're going to look like a hero, because the numbers now in your spreadsheet are going to change dramatically, and your cost per hire is going to change. Your time to fill is going to change. And you're also going to feel it on a day-to-day basis, because people aren't going to be complaining about that thing anymore. They're going to be like, wow, we fixed that problem. How amazing is that?
Yeah. And I mean, when you found your different stages and like started to get like ahead of it, how would you say, do you have like insights of putting numbers to them? If you're like quite new to this, what could be reasonable numbers? Like how many interviews or how many weeks of advertising, things like what could be we start doing?
Yeah, I think that it's really good to have benchmarking data. And there's two benchmarks that matter. One is what your company does right now. So you want to know, 5% of the people go to our career site become an applicant, because if you are trying to change that and you change your application flow and it becomes 10%, then you want to go to your boss and be like, hey, the thing that we did worked really, really well. So you want to know your own internal numbers, because that's just super important when you change something to prove the ROI. And then you want to have benchmarks that are specific to your industry and your role type, because the time to fill for an hourly worker is going to be, maybe 2 weeks. And the time to fill for a senior engineer might be 3 months. And that might be good. 3 months might be a good thing, or you're doing exec recruiting or whatever. So, I can throw out like some benchmarks, but it's going to be so different depending on what country you're in, what roles you're looking for. And so my advice would be to join a really good Slack group that has your peers who are recruiting for the same sort of person. Join a Facebook group. Go to vendors, honestly, like Adway. Like, you guys have an absurd amount of data. Go to your ATS vendor and say, look, like, I want to know what does good look like for time to fill for this type of role. And some of these have actually published the data. Like, I think Workable has published a ton of information about time to fill and even cost per hire per role, which is really interesting. But yeah, it's important to have those two different types of benchmarks.
Cool. And I mean, speaking of going back to what we initially started with, I mean, automating and putting data into our daily process. Would you be like, do you even get the question of, I mean, always when we start talking data, I always get like the throwback, like, we need to be more human in this. And I mean, it's a fact of fear, of course. It's a fact of getting to know your data and your processes and what needs to be done. But I mean, just having the numbers of like today, I guess 95% of your like time and budget goes to the top funnel, when it actually could be 95% in the bottom funnel. What's your like thoughts about this, of like optimizing and like focusing and efficient the process?
Yeah, well, still keeping it human.
Yeah.
That's a real problem. I think that if you actually just live in a spreadsheet all day long, you're going to make really bad decisions. You're going to optimize the candidate process to the point where people don't want to apply for a job at your company, potentially, because, you're asking them to like jump through these like ridiculous hoops in the candidate assessment part or whatever the case may be. And I think this was even one of you guys do a really great job of like asking somebody to like save questions for these LinkedIn Lives. And somebody was like, what are the pitfalls? And I would say one of them is living in a spreadsheet. And I think the nice thing is that the majority, like 95% of recruiting teams, have the exact opposite problem, which is they don't do any sort of analysis. They don't live in spreadsheets for even an hour a month. And so they sort of miss out on these like no-brainer, low-hanging fruit optimizations. My advice for people who are maybe in that 5% or worried about being in that 5% that are too data-driven is to always think about the implications for what you're doing on the two most important humans throughout all this, which is one, the candidate, and two, the recruiter, because the recruiter experience matters a lot as well. If your recruiters are unhappy, then like they're not going to be good to candidates. They're not going to win the best candidates. They're not going to work hard, et cetera. And it just kind of stinks, right? It hurts your culture. So you always need to be thinking about, how does this impact people? You can do net promoter scores. That's a decent way to keep on top of how the candidate experience is treating people. And then you can also ask people to do things like leave reviews on Glassdoor or Kununu or Indeed, depending on where you are in the world. And you can get that feedback and you can reincorporate that. Maybe you implement video interviews in a way that is very unhuman and people are like, oh, this is terrible, right? And the last kind of caveat I'll say on this is there's always going to be somebody who doesn't like your recruiting process, many times because they didn't get a job. And so make sure that when you're collecting this human feedback, you're also doing it in sort of a data-driven way where you're seeing there's like statistical significance. It's not just one person says, hey, I didn't like interacting with that chatbot, and so you rip out the chatbot. Whereas most other people thought it was great and your recruiters love it and it's actually doing a great job.
Yeah. And I mean, in addition to that, I guess when you have automized and put in like data-driven processes to your like top funnel or your entire recruitment funnel, you will have time being and having the best human touch points later in the process or whenever needed in the process. So I mean, it gives you time to be more human. I mean, you don't have to do all this manual stuff that you like spent a lot of time with before and historically as well.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's
Imagine if you're 3 times more effective sourcing, and maybe you spend 20 hours sourcing a week, and now you're spending 6 hours, you have 14 hours in your week. What can you do at that time? You can focus on strategic things like understanding your hiring funnel and how to fix it.
yeah.
But you can also focus on like those amazing candidates who you really want to have join the company, and
Mm.
answering all their questions and spending an extra 15 minutes on the phone screen and doing all these things that you wish you had time for, but you don't because you're doing all this stuff that you could probably automate with better technology.
Yeah, totally agree. And I will just like to say that if you are new to this live stream, we have a lot of people joining us. Then you can, of course, ask your question here in the comment section. And if you know for a fact that you haven't been with us the whole time, just comment summary to get all the most important key takeaways from this live stream. So, Phil, we have, I guess, like a couple of minutes left. It goes much more faster than you think when you
Yeah.
start talking about your passion. And I mean, set aside the numbers to the different stages. I know we've dug into that. Would you say like, I think we got a question on this topic. I actually like this question from Victor. Could you mention some KPIs that is a must know regarding TA? So speaking
Yes,
stages.
Victor. I'm not surprised this guy came up with a good question. So I think, the must know metrics are your cost per hire and your time to fill in aggregate across your company. And ideally, you want to know those numbers on a role by role basis.
Yeah.
And the reason is because when you're looking at the return on investment from different initiatives, those are the numbers that the CFO is going to care about the most. If you can decrease the time to fill so that salespeople are getting into the job faster and generating revenue faster, that is huge when you're asking for more budget for the stuff that you want to do, for the employer branding stuff, all these things that we're all passionate about. And the same obviously is true of cost per hire, decrease cost per hire. Now, you ideally want to know it for different people. So if we talked about retail versus engineering, et cetera, that's really important. I think the other sort of must-know metric for me is conversion rates from one step of the funnel to the next. So what percentage of people go from the career website to applying for a job? What percentage of people go from applying to a job to a screen, from a screen to an interview, et cetera? And those are so important because especially when you look at benchmarking data with your peers, you're going to understand, oh, we don't screen as many people as we should, or our people don't become hires at a fast enough rate, or whatever the case may be. And that's going to show you where the lowest hanging fruit is across your organization.
Yeah. And it's differ, as you mentioned.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So we got a lot of questions here. I'm trying to sort them out. Let's put in 𝗕𝗘𝗓. Are you familiar with 𝗕𝗘𝗓, Phil?
I'm not.
No, you're not. Okay.
I don't think so.
So this is a question from Frederick. He's from 𝗕𝗘𝗓, an ATS system, which is really in the forefront, I would say. So I'm going to read this. With the corona pandemic, a lot of people have become unemployed, which has led to a surge of applicants putting pressure to the recruiters and their ATS. What would you say is important for the people who are looking for an ATS right now? Cool question.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. I think that I'm always like a longer term thinker. And so I think especially with an ATS, like you're still gonna buy it for the long term, and so I would think about what do you need right now? And maybe there's an ATS out there that kind of checks your boxes for 3-5 years, which is really how you should be thinking about an ATS, in my opinion. And also maybe solves your short-term pain of, maybe we're getting way too many applicants, we need a better way to screen them, or whatever the case may be. But you can also look for point solutions to solve those shorter term pain points as well.
Yeah.
So if whatever the case may be, like we need mobile apply or whatever, you can probably find a vendor that can just like put a band-aid on that. I wouldn't put band-aids on things for a really long time, but I also think that potentially, like the world that we live in, and maybe this is just me being irrationally optimistic, but I hope a year from now it's very, very different.
Yeah, and I guess it is. And I think, of course, as you mentioned, long term would be the long term solution, and you can always put in like super efficient solutions during this like different time, like automate your screening questions or whatever needs to be done.
Yeah.
But a great question, Fredrik. Thank you for joining us. I think we've had some questions that we collected from when we went live with the live, meaning that we posted on LinkedIn, asking people to have questions and give them to it. Let's see if we can put them up on the screen. Do you see it, Phil?
Yeah.
Do you see Phil? Phil.
I see Phil. Thanks, Phil, for the question.
So here's a question from Phil from Lonza. He's the talent acquisition leader there. He says, funnel stats, useful predictors or hiring managers, distractors. And if this is off Phil, I completely understand. Yeah, let's bring this up, Phil.
That's funny. I think that, so it's basically like, should you actually look at your numbers or not? And I think that the answer to this question is to look at what do the best sales and marketing teams do? Because in general, I think sales and marketing many times is like a bit ahead of talent acquisition, and there's a lot of analogs. It's not perfect, but it's pretty similar. And there's a lot on the line, right? It's revenue. It's like whether or not the business survives. And if you talk to like any decent executive at a sales and marketing function, they know their numbers cold. They look at their numbers every single day. And there's a reason for that. And it's not because, the best run sales and marketing teams want to distract themselves. It's because like, this is the way to make sure that you're hitting your numbers and growing your business. And I think that in an ideal world, talent acquisition teams are going to be doing the same thing. And I think, that'll happen eventually. You can certainly like, get bogged down, analysis paralysis, all that stuff. But like, you got to spend more time. 99% of TA teams need to spend more time with their numbers.
Yeah, well spoken.
Thank you.
Thank you, Phil, and thank you, Phil. Let's move on to the next. I think we have one here from Don Slope. He's a strategy and growth manager at 𝗕𝗘𝗖𝗢𝗡. So bad data-driven decision-making is full of vanity metrics. So how do we keep FAIR as a fundamental for data-driven decision-making? Do you see the point here?
I don't know. Does FAIR stand for something or?
No, I guess he means fair, like not like the best ever, like what is reasonable in this question.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. Yeah. And vanity metrics are a huge problem. Like you can log into LinkedIn and it's like, oh, 50 million people saw our advertisement and, nothing happened. So that's like a really important point is like, don't just focus on those things that like actually aren't, coming down the pipeline. And you can see that if you actually map out the hiring process that we talked about earlier. I think like to stay fair and maybe not strive to be the best, like it again comes back to that benchmarking data. And maybe a little bit of what Don's getting at is like this 80-20 principle where, yeah, you could have the best conversion rate on your career site ever, but maybe you spent like tons of money and tons of time on that. And what you really should have done is spend half as much time and money. And then you should have devoted all those other efforts to a better screening process or a better employer brand throughout the rest of the hiring funnel to get more people to accept offers or, whatever the case may be. So don't strive to be the best of the best, I would say, unless you're Google and you need to be. I would say do the 80-20, get to good or pretty good, and then move on to your next big problem.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess this is one of the reasons why people are afraid to start measuring, They are afraid to be like a failure of number. But I mean, the progress is putting numbers to it. That is, from there you can start working, you can start evolving, making progress, right?
That's exactly right. And if you're so worried about that, you don't have to share those numbers with anybody. Like you can keep them a secret and until you make some progress. So don't worry about being worst in class at something. If you're worst in class, all that means is you have an amazing low-hanging fruit. You can fix it, and you can take credit in your organization for being a hero and fixing that problem.
Yeah, love it. Really good, really good. Thank you, Dawn. Thank you for this question. So we have Susan. She's the CEO of a quite large recruitment firm here in the Nordics, and she has a question for us. Phil, how do you best prepare your team to become data-driven? And I guess this is quite a large question. Let's be more specific with this one, shall we?
Sure, I'll try my best. Rein me in if I'm too general. So we actually have like a short course on our website about how to be like a sort of like an ROI focused talent acquisition team. I think that preparing your team, there has to be a specific leader in the organization who kind of spearheads this stuff and really educates people, who learns, who does the painful work, who learns, and then who sits everyone down and is like, hey, here's what I learned. So what I would say is like somebody is leading this, and then they have a brown bag lunch and learn where they sit down with everybody and they're like, okay, guys, like here's the state of our hiring funnel. And, Susie and Jay like always complain about, X, Y, Z, and here's why they complain about it. And here's what we're going to do about it. So that would be my advice.
Yeah. And I mean, as well as like pointing to the value for the business always, like what can we do better, how can we improve our work, and all of that. And I mean, it's a question of getting used to measure what you do and put numbers to it. And I guess what we're saying is that you shouldn't be afraid just starting mapping out, starting knowing your stages and put numbers to them.
That's right.
Cool. Thank you for that question, Susan. And Phil, the time is running up. I know it goes faster than you think. As mentioned to everyone watching, if you would like all of these KPIs, all of these key takeaways, please comment summary in the comment section and we will get back to you with all of the insights. And Phil, if you were to give us like your most important key takeaways from this session, what would that be?
Yeah, I think that the key takeaways are start small and start by mapping out what your hiring process looks like and where to get the data to understand what's actually going on there. I think that the other sort of process-driven takeaway is to focus on the one thing that is the most broken in your process after getting some benchmarking data. And lastly, I think that, sorry, you did a better job of explaining this than I did, but you just kind of need to get started, and progress is getting started. You don't have to worry about making progress on increasing your numbers or doing any of this stuff. The progress is in just literally opening up a spreadsheet or getting a piece of paper and starting and spending an hour or two per week or per month on this problem, because it takes a little bit of time to come up this learning curve. But when you do, there's really amazing benefits for your organization and then for you personally, because selfishly, you can kind of take credit for this stuff when you actually get success.
Yeah, you will be the best in your team. You will go with numbers.
Yeah, and I think from an individual career perspective, so many talent acquisition teams email me and are like, hey, Phil, we want to hire a people analyst. We want to hire somebody for our recruiting team that understands numbers. We can't do it. We're willing to pay X, Y, Z. And the salaries are unbelievable. Yeah. And it's because there just aren't enough people that understand recruiting, who have done the job, who also understand numbers. And so if you can be that person, you are going to be incredibly successful in your career.
Yeah. And I mean, doing it, starting knowing your numbers, starting working with it, you know that there are ways to automate, there are ways to make even better progress. But I mean, just getting ahead of how to start, and just by encourage your team, this is the future. I mean, that's then you're far from any other doing it, I would say.
Yeah, and it is the future. And so you either plan on being, not very good at your job, retiring, or you gotta do this stuff anyway. So just bite the bullet and start doing it.
Yeah, cool. And if anybody is watching are gonna start biting the bullet, should they contact you on your LinkedIn and me? I guess we're open for questions, right?
Oh yeah, without a doubt. Phil Strazzulla. I'm like the only, there is another Phil Strazzulla, but he spells his name differently. So I'm easy to find. Select software reviews. I'm the guy on the website. So please reach out if you have any other questions. I'd be happy to help out.
Cool. Well, thank you, Phil, for this amazing crash course in how to start working with data in your recruitment process. And I guess everyone who needs the key takeaways, just comment summary down below. And if this was as much fun for you as it was for me, we should maybe perhaps getting back and getting forward this LinkedIn stuff.
Yeah, totally. Thank you. Yeah, thanks everybody for the questions, and thanks for having me. This is a good way to start my Friday. I have to go to the dentist right now, so it was good to have this to look forward to, even though I have to go to the dentist afterwards. But I hope everybody has an awesome weekend, and please feel free to reach out if anything I said doesn't make any sense.
Sounds great. Well, thanks everybody for watching, and we'll be seeing you in the next live stream. Have a great Friday. Bye-bye.